So could you tell us your name, please?
My name is Hartuv, and I know you asked me to tell your amazing people what happened to me.
Yeah.
But honestly, Aviel, I can't do this again. I've been telling it, and anybody can Google my name, and there's plenty of interviews of what happened to me, recent interviews on CNN, on Fox News, it's everywhere over the internet. And aside from that, it's irrelevant, okay? Nobody is talking about the hostages anymore. Nobody is talking about anymore the babies who were beheaded, the women who were raped, the young people at a music festival who were gunned down and taken off to that hell, which is Gaza. And I've just got to tell you, I come out of a Zoom just before you arrived. The most surrealistic thing I've ever encountered in my life. As a guide at Yad Vashem, I was sitting there with 100+ other guides on Zoom, and we were discussing the unthinkable. We were discussing whether this is another Holocaust. We're in 2023. So I don't think what happened to me is relevant anymore. And what we're seeing, you know, people obviously love dead Jews, all right? That's when we get the sympathy. On the one hand, we have respectable sons of light governments who are saying we're backing Israel. And on the other hand, we have the very fickle media who for 2 days filmed in sympathy, but now they're bringing that moral equivalence. And the world changed not just on the 7th of October, it changed on the 9th of October when the likes of Sky News decided to give a platform to a Hamas terrorist in the name of balance. And that opened the floodgates. And ever since, these people who have a God-given responsibility to spread news and not hate have been offering up their media platforms to give balance in the name of both-sidedness. And I'm telling you this, there's no two sides. Well, there are. The two sides are, and you have to choose. Everybody has to choose. You choose either good or evil. You choose between light and dark. You choose between death or life. And Israel is on the side of life. Israel and those who are abhorred by these savage atrocities are the sons of light. They're on the side of humanity, and we are engaging in a war against those who don't bear the image of God. And things are escalating so quickly. It's time for people to decide what side they're on, and it's not restricted to Israel. It's not about land. We have now tens of thousands of people marching through European streets saying, murder the Jews. This is the beginning, what could be another Holocaust. And how much does it take to be a Holocaust? People have their idea, you know, they say, oh, the Holocaust was the murder of 6 million Jews in the concentration camps and gas chambers of Europe. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. That was the minority. Over 2 million Jewish people were shot to death. Hundreds of thousands were butchered by their neighbors in places like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine. Hungary hands over their fodder to the Nazis. Jews weren't butchered in Western Europe, no, but the neighbors in France and Holland and Belgium were quite happy to go to each house of a Jewish person and shove them on the train and never see them again. Europe has had her blood on its hands from those days, and now that can be redeemed, and the people of light can actually restore the good. Every single human being needs to take sides with Israel. It's not even a choice. And when they do that, that will be the day that once again God says, let there be light.
I was talking with my wife, and it is hard to put a name to this, because it's beyond words. That only a person like yourself who experienced you were killed, you were murdered, you know the pain, the unbelief, the shock. So you, in your own experience, you can basically understand with a full sense of the word what these people went those who survived. Obviously, there were, hundreds who were brutally killed. But you survived. I believe that you are a voice in the midst. You say, well, my story is not relevant. I think your voice is still relevant because you survived the atrocity of these two men who went out with the only purpose to kill Jews.
It's an interesting point because after the attack, the losses incurred in something like this are vast, universal. And I thought, wow, I lost my friend, lost my health, lost the expectancy of a long life, lost the dignity of providing for myself, lost sleep, routine, the sense of the mundane. And I thought also that I'd lost the hope of ever being understood by another human being. That changed on October the 7th. Now we have a few handful of survivors of 1,300 butchered Jews, probably more, who can, or I can understand what they're going through. But Aviel, we don't need to understand in order to take action. Things are very clear. Things are very clear. There is good and there is evil. There is wickedness and there is righteousness. And there's no room for standing on the fence. Jewish people all over the world are scrambling into hiding as these mobs of savages dressed in suits and ties parade the streets of Europe.
For those who are going to be watching this, what will you say your message is?
My message is, wherever you are, I'll tell you what my message is. Just for a little bit of broad history, all right? That we know Hitler comes to power. Satan himself comes to power in 1933. It took 8 years until what we call the final solution, the exclusive, intended, pointed industrial murder of the Jews of Europe. It took 8 years. This has taken 2 days, all right? And so what I would say is that in 1933, when all these hateful speech against Jews and these different laws against Jewish people came into place, if Germans had stood up then, and Germany is a great friend of Israel today, all right? One of our greatest allies, but if Germans had stood up with the little things, such as, you know what, I know this restaurant says no Jews, but that's my friend. Or they stood up and said, you can't say that about a person just because he's Jewish. If they'd have done the little things in 1933, we wouldn't have had a Holocaust. So what I'm saying is, the message is that whoever you are, you have to speak up. You have to use every resource at your hands in availability, whether it's social media, whether it's speaking out what you're saying to somebody, who's saying terrible things. For some of you, it might be having the courage. Not everybody can do this, okay? But to get in a protest or a demonstration against these demonstrators, it's writing to the media, it's calling the media to express your absolute disgust and moral outrage. These are the things which we need people to fight for. Not for, you're fighting for Israel, but also the Jewish community worldwide and for humanity itself. There is so much to do. People, I haven't slept for like 8 days, barely eaten, like all of us here. I'm sure you're the same, right? But now in the world, it's time to make a stand. Bystanders, after the war, because obviously not every German person was a Nazi, we know that. Very few did the actual killing, but enough were collaborators. And if they weren't collaborators, they stood by. We call them bystanders. And these bystanders will say, well, I didn't do anything wrong, but you know what? They didn't do anything right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
One last word. And all the people said, Am Israel Chai. We're going to get through this. Israel will prevail because goodness prevails. Thank you, Aviel.
Thank you. Thank you, Tan.
At 6 a.m. on the 7th of October in the year of 2023, The earth was formed and full. The trees surrounding the little sleepy kibbutzim and towns near Gaza had been recently plucked for the Feast of Sukkot. Morning had broken and blackbirds spoke. Like that first morning, humanity rested, and God saw that it was good. Long ago, God had separated light from the dark when he called the light day and the darkness night. The demarcation line was written by the finger of God himself. It was there to separate right from wrong and good from evil and dark from light and life from death. On the 7th of October, that line was crossed. After the Holocaust, the Jewish people wanted to believe in the remnant of humanity who had emerged from the rubble, edged back over the line and declared never again. But in a blink of an eye, it has turned into just one more time. At 6:30 a.m. on the 7th of October, dark waters hovered over the sleepy kibbutzim and towns near Gaza. It was the calm before the storm. Cloaked in tranquility and without warning, the tsunami suddenly struck. Evil swelled and evil bulged, unleashing waves of death upon the unsuspecting Jewish people at rest. Those once created in his image showed no restraint. From house to house they went. They bludgeoned fathers who were trying to protect their children. They impaled mothers and ripped out fetuses. They beheaded babies. They kidnapped the young and the old and torched entire families. Evil rampaged onwards. While listening to heaven's language of music, it was God's children from 26 nations who were shot, raped, kidnapped, and dragged off to hell itself. But God was not surprised. For years, those who were formed in his image had pleaded with governments to stop the funding of savages. Billions squandered lined the pockets of those same sons of darkness who broke through the fence that day into the sleepy kibbutzim and towns near Gaza. Those who joined in the massacre were not just Hamás. They were Islamic Jihad, the Al-Aqsa Brigade and Fatah, factions of the PLO, whose authority is Mahmoud Abbas, a barbarian welcomed into the respected chambers of diplomacy, such as the United Nations and Western governments. Savages incarcerated in Israeli jails have been watching their savings grow by millions every month as taxpayers' money is deposited into their accounts. Into the pockets of UNRWA, the so-called United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, has poured billions and billions with the objective of giving the Palestinians a livelihood, education and dignity, but they've never done it. Gaza could have been a Beverly Hills, but instead of empowerment, UNRWA have shackled an entire people for 3 generations in perpetual and festering victimhood. The only fancy cars in the squalor of Gaza today are the Toyotas of UNRWA. Actually, those same vans found in the torched kibbutzim and rubble of towns near Gaza. And the heavens shook and trembled. At 4 p.m. on the 7th of October, in the torched kibbutzim and rubble of towns near Gaza, those bearing the image of God began to arrive at the scene. Pimpled-faced teenagers delivering pizza on mopeds only hours before were now given a gun to hunt the ages of death, charged with saving lives they needed to kill. In the pockets of the murderers were educational diplomas with the stamp of UNRWA. Others bearing his image also did his holy work. They moved around the gardens, collecting babies' heads strewn among the geraniums. And as they did, they sobbed and they wept and they fell to the ground, and God howled. At 6 p.m. on the 7th of October, from the torched kibbutzim and rubble of towns near Gaza, news began to break out all over the world. Journalists used their God-given platforms with responsibility, but horror muzzled speech. and terror gagged mouths as all humanity could do is weep. In place of a language not yet invented, the flag of God's people was raised up high. In a unified declaration of outrage, defiance, love and support, the blue and white foundation of Western civilization was projected on monuments, towers and buildings. Leaders of nations also offered unequivocal support, something Israel has never experienced since rising from the ashes somewhere back in time. And when God saw that, he was comforted. At 10:45 a.m. on the 10th of October, reports broke out on Sky News. In place of the frantic and grief-stricken faces that we had seen over the last 2 days was a new face, a face void of the image of God. It was that of the Hamas's head of political and international relations. When the world heard his hatred, a handful of righteous among the nations courageously spoke up. The vast majority, though, stood by. Arguably, they will contend that to be a bystander is to do nothing wrong. But I tell you, we've heard that story before. It was a pivotal point in humanity, not since 1933. From that moment, anchors interviewed sons of darkness in the name of balance on both sides, using mind-boggling, murderous journalistic gymnastics to rationalize the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. As the airwaves belched out Goebbels, the brown shirts gathered in the streets. This time they wore grey suits, t-shirts or keffiyehs, and as they moved through the streets of civilization, it was in the name of free speech that they called for the final solution. And when they did, they passed those very same monuments, towers and buildings where only days before had shone the blue and white of morality. God's people yet again ran for their lives, and today are in hiding, in fear, waiting for the beginning, the inevitable Kristallnacht. And God saw that and he raged. On October the 11th, 2023, Israel formed a war cabinet, which made it an unforgettable day marked on the calendar of humanity. Voices of the hostages, as they continue to be raped and tortured, still cry out from the ground. But within minutes, these voices are drowned out by the bogus indignation and hate of perpetual Palestinian victimhood. A mass of humanity was called to the front. Most of the 400,000 are the kind of pimpled teenagers who deliver pizza on mopeds one day and don a uniform and a gun on the next. The voices of the hostages is also drowned out by calls for proportionate response. But woe be Israel if we engage in proportionate response. What will our children become if they diss the rules of war and play by the rules of Hamas to ensure a proportionate response? This will mean, a proportionate response will mean that our children would have to barge into the exact same number of homes of innocent civilians, behead the same exact number of babies, rape the same exact number of mothers, girls and grandmothers, and then burn the exact same number of families and execute the exact same number of hostages while using the phones of the victims to live stream their murder on Facebook. So it's only those without the image of God who are demanding Israel for a proportionate response. We who have gone beyond the requirements of rules of war are the agents of humanity. Israel has tapped bomb buildings, dropped warning leaflets in Arabic, and ensured a humanitarian route for refugees. And while thousands of innocent civilians run for their lives, it's easy to believe that Israel is inhumane. But it is the vindictive Egypt who has closed its borders, the bankrupt UNRWA, who could have alleviated the situation with the billions that they no longer have because they have squandered it. That was the day God warned Israel not to engage in proportionate response. And so, heeding the warning of God to target only evil, the people of Israel, together with the other sons of light, are setting out to war. Those who bear the image of God understand that, like every other war in history, there will be thousands, if not millions, of civilian casualties. But now is that time, and those on the side of humanity know that there is no turning back. The Jewish people and the other great nations who bear the divine image will destroy darkness, whatever it takes, because there is no option. It is the commission of Israel to be a light to the nations, and that day is here. And on this day, this is the day when God will say once again, "Let there be light."